A struggling single dad pulls over in the rain to fix a stranger's flat tire. He has no idea the woman soaking beside him is one of the richest CEOs in the country, and she's about to turn his entire life upside down. Before we dive in, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment. Where in the world are you watching from? The rain had turned from a drizzle to a steady downpour, coating the windshield in a blur of city lights and mud-streaked pavement. Carter Hayes squinted through the wipers, knuckles tight on the steering wheel, as his rusted pickup groaned around the bend. He was already 10 minutes late to pick up Lily from her after-school program. He hated being late. Lily never said much about it, but her little face always fell just a bit, like she was trying not to care. Carter pushed the gas a little harder, willing the truck to hold together a few more miles. Then he saw her. A white car sat angled on the shoulder, hazard lights blinking faintly through the sheet of rain. Beside it stood a woman with dark hair and a coat that looked like it cost more than his entire month's rent, trying to stay dry under an umbrella that had given up the fight. The rear tire sagged flat, water pooling beneath it. Carter's gut told him to keep going. He had places to be, responsibilities to juggle. But something about the way she stood there, determined but slowly unraveling, made him ease off the gas. He let out a sigh, pulled the truck over, and shifted into park. Rain punched through the air as he stepped out, his boot slipping slightly on the wet shoulder. "Need a hand?" he asked, already walking toward her. She turned, a flicker of surprise on her face. "I can't get the jack to work. Roadside assistance says an hour." "I've got it," Carter replied, crouching beside the car before she could say more. She stepped back without protest, watching as he knelt on the cold asphalt, the rain soaking through his jacket. He didn't ask her name. She didn't ask his. Some moments didn't need introductions. 15 minutes later, the spare was on, and Carter stood, water dripping from his hair. "You're set." "Thank you," she said softly, like the words weren't enough. Carter gave a small nod. "Drive safe." Then he turned, climbed into his old truck, and pulled away, unaware that a soaked, stunned billionaire was left standing there, watching him disappear, and realizing she might not be able to forget him if she tried. The rain didn't let up. If anything, it thickened, like the clouds had decided to wring themselves dry all at once. Carter's jacket clung to his back, and the water running down his face felt more like a steady faucet than a drizzle. Still, he stayed crouched by the tire, his hands slick but sure. He'd fought rusted lug nuts and worse, but the stubbornness of this flat was starting to test his patience. Above him, the woman in the raincoat shifted uncomfortably, clutching her useless umbrella like it was some kind of shield. She was trying to stay composed, shoulders back, chin lifted, but her soaked coat betrayed her. It was the kind of fabric you'd see in high-end catalogs, meant for light strolls in dry weather, not torrential breakdowns on back roads. Her hair, once neatly tucked behind her ears, now clung to her cheeks in dark, dripping strands. And though her expression stayed firm, Carter could see the cracks forming around her eyes. "I told you I could wait for roadside," she said again, though this time her voice lacked the sharpness it had before. "Yeah," Carter replied without looking up, "but I'm already here." She didn't answer that, just stood there, arms folded tight, biting her lip like it might stop her from saying something she'd regret. It wasn't that she was ungrateful, she just wasn't used to this, being helped without asking, being looked at without expectation. Carter, for his part, wasn't trying to play the hero. He just hated the idea of someone standing in the rain while he had the means to fix the problem. That was how he'd been raised. You help where you can. You do what needs doing. "You're not from around here," he said finally, breaking the silence as he tightened the last lug nut. She hesitated. "Is it that obvious?" "Your coat's not made for weather like this," he said, glancing up with a half smile. "And your shoes look like they've never seen gravel." To his surprise, she laughed, a short, surprised sound that caught even her off guard. "You're not wrong." Carter stood and wiped his hands on a rag that used to be white. "Well, welcome to nowhere." She looked at him for a moment, water dripping from her lashes. "Thanks for stopping." He shrugged. "Some things are worth stopping for." And then he turned to leave, never once asking for her name. Carter knelt again, bracing his shoulder against the soaked frame as he strained against the last lug nut. The thing wouldn't move, rusted solid, like it had made a lifelong commitment to that wheel. He grunted, adjusted the wrench, and tried again. Rain streamed off the brim of his cap, dripping onto the cold metal and the tops of his boots. Behind him, the woman shifted her weight from one foot to the other. Her heels clicked against the wet gravel. Clearly not designed for roadside emergencies, she hugged her coat tighter and finally broke the silence. "You do this often?" Carter didn't look up. "Flat tires? More than I'd like." "I meant helping strangers in the rain." He gave a low chuckle, wedging the wrench tighter. "Depends. Are you counting every time or just this week?" She almost smiled. "Almost. Is that your job? Mechanic?" He nodded. "Auto shop back in town, Hayes and Sons. Though there's no sons yet, just me and my daughter Lily." "7," Carter said automatically. Then, realizing how personal it sounded, he added, "She likes to help out when I let her." The woman's expression softened slightly. "That's sweet." He grunted as the wrench finally gave a half turn. The nut creaked, then loosened. "She's tougher than she looks," he muttered, more to himself. A beat passed, then she said, "I didn't mean to be rude before." "You weren't. I just—" She paused, adjusting the belt of her coat. "I'm not great at asking for help." Carter leaned back on his heels, looking up at her for the first time since he'd started. "That makes two of us." Her eyes met his. It wasn't a romantic moment, just honest, like two people accidentally standing in the same patch of truth. He turned back to the tire, now replacing the lug nuts with practiced ease. "You headed somewhere important?" "Kind of," she said, voice quiet, "but now I'm not so sure." Carter didn't ask for details. He just tightened the last bolt, gave the tire a solid tap, and stood up. "Well," he said, brushing rain off his arms, "wherever it was, at least you'll get there in one piece." She didn't answer right away, just looked at him like she wasn't used to this kind of conversation, one that asked for nothing, yet somehow said everything. The spare was on, tools packed. The rain had thinned to a mist, clinging to the air like a breath not yet exhaled. Carter gave the tire one last nudge with his boot, making sure it was snug. He stepped back, hands on his hips, breathing through the ache in his shoulders. He was soaked, smeared with grease and grit, and still had half a day's work waiting for him. But for now, the job was done. The woman brushed damp strands of hair from her cheek and walked over, digging into her coat pocket. Out came a slim black wallet, sleek, expensive, probably custom-made. She pulled out a few crisp bills, held them out with a grateful nod. "Please, for your time." Carter shook his head without hesitation. "No need." She blinked. "I insist." He glanced at the money, then at her, and offered a lopsided shrug. "It's just a tire. You were stuck. I had a wrench. Simple math." Her hand lingered in the air for a moment before falling back to her side. Not everyone would have stopped. "Maybe not," he said, reaching into his truck bed for a rag. "But they should." She watched as he wiped his hands, then looked down at the folded money in her palm, like it suddenly weighed more than it should. "There has to be something I can do." Carter paused, looked at her for the first time with something softer than politeness, just quiet, clear sincerity. "Just be safe," he said, voice low, worn. "That'll do." And then he smiled. It wasn't big or polished, just a tired, honest curve that tugged up at one corner of his mouth. A smile that said he didn't expect anything, didn't want anything, but was glad he could help. It was the kind of smile you didn't forget, because it came from someone who had no reason to offer it, but did anyway. She stared at him a second longer than she meant to. "Thank you," she said again, almost under her breath. Carter nodded once, climbed into his truck, and pulled away. She stood alone by the roadside, soaked and still holding the money he wouldn't take, wondering why the simplest moment suddenly felt like the most important one of her week. The house smelled faintly of reheated spaghetti, and the lingering scent of motor oil that always seemed to cling to Carter's jacket, no matter how many times he washed it. The furnace kicked on with a low rumble, pushing warm air through the vents as the windows fogged from the contrast of cold rain outside and the comfort of home within. Carter stood in front of the stove, stirring the pot of sauce that had seen better days, the kind that clings to the sides like it's trying not to be forgotten. Lily sat at the kitchen table, legs swinging beneath the chair, a crayon gripped tightly in her small hand as she colored a picture of what looked like a unicorn flying over a farm. She hummed softly to herself, completely unaware of the tired weight in her father's shoulders. "You remembered the garlic bread this time?" she asked, without looking up. Carter chuckled, setting the wooden spoon down. "Only burned it a little." "That's okay," she said cheerfully. "I like it crispy." He grabbed two mismatched plates from the cupboard, moving slowly, deliberately. His back ached from kneeling in the rain. His boots were still damp, and yet he didn't say a word about the woman. Not her flat tire, not her fancy coat, not her voice, soft but clipped. Not the way she'd looked at him when he refused her money. Some things weren't worth bringing into a quiet night. "Fork or spoon tonight?" he asked, sliding the noodles onto her plate. "Spoon. More sauce that way." She grinned. He obliged and sat down across from her, rubbing a hand across his stubble. Outside, the rain tapped steadily against the roof, a lullaby for the worn out. They ate in companionable silence, the only noise the occasional clink of a spoon against ceramic. "Did anything interesting happen today?" Lily asked through a mouthful. Carter paused, then shook his head. "Same as always." He smiled at her, his real smile, the one that reached his eyes. And she smiled back, not knowing her father had helped a stranger in the rain, not knowing that sometimes the things he didn't say were the ones still echoing the loudest inside him. Vivian sat in the plush leather seat of her luxury car, the rain-soaked city streets blurring past the tinted windows like a watercolor painting left out in the storm. The warmth of the cabin was a sharp contrast to the chill that had settled deep in her bones, the kind that had nothing to do with weather. Her mind kept drifting back to the mechanic who had knelt beside her car, hands steady despite the rain, voice calm but carrying an unspoken weight. She couldn't explain why his simple words echoed louder than any boardroom meeting or corporate strategy she'd ever heard. Just be safe. Those 3 words had wrapped around her like a lifeline in a world filled with power plays and guarded smiles. There was honesty in his tone, a tired kind of hope she hadn't realized she was craving. Vivian stared out the window, watching a child splash through a puddle, carefree and unaware. That was the life she'd buried under contracts, deadlines, and endless responsibilities. Yet here she was, haunted by a stranger's quiet kindness. Her assistant's voice broke the spell. "Ms. Hartley, the quarterly report is ready. Shall I bring it to you?" She blinked, pulling her thoughts back from the fog. "Not yet. I need a moment." Turning off the ignition, Vivian leaned back, the leather sighing beneath her. Her fingers tapped nervously against the steering wheel, tracing invisible patterns. She was searching for something she couldn't name, something far removed from stock prices or shareholder meetings. The man's eyes, so genuine and unguarded, flitted across her mind. His rough jacket, the worn wrench in his hands, the way he didn't ask for anything in return. She was used to people wanting something from her, control, influence. But he had given her something she hadn't realized she needed, an unexpected moment of realness. Vivian exhaled slowly, the tension in her shoulders easing just a bit. She didn't know where this feeling would lead, but one thing was clear. She couldn't let it go. She would find him. Not because she had to, but because for the first time in a long while, She wanted to. Vivian's search led her far from the gleaming towers of the city, down winding country roads flanked by weathered fences and fields dotted with grazing cattle. The GPS blinked, "You have arrived," but all she saw was a modest building squeezed between a faded diner and a dusty feed store. No flashy sign hung above the door, just a faded banner stretched across the front that read, "Hayes & Sons Auto Repair." The garage looked like it had been there for decades. The paint peeled in places, and the parking lot was a patchwork of gravel and dirt, scattered with the occasional oil stain. A few pickup trucks and beat-up sedans were lined up like old friends waiting for a tune-up, their owners chatting lazily nearby. Vivian parked carefully and stepped out, the smell of motor oil and rubber hitting her immediately. The garage door was open, revealing a cavernous workspace filled with toolboxes, grease-streaked rags, and the comforting clang of metal on metal. Carter Hayes was there, sleeves rolled up, focused on the engine of a battered truck, his hands moving with practiced ease. A group of locals gathered around him, waiting patiently as he explained what was wrong with their vehicles in simple, honest terms. No jargon, no sales pitch. They nodded along, trusting him completely. It was clear he wasn't just fixing cars, he was taking care of people. Vivian watched from the doorway, feeling a strange mix of admiration and humility. This was a world so far removed from her own, the sharp edges and high stakes of boardrooms replaced by genuine connections and steady, reliable work. She thought back to the rain-soaked moment when he'd helped her, his smile tired but real. This place, this man, it was as if she'd stumbled into a pocket of truth she hadn't known existed. Summoning her courage, she took a step inside, determined to see what lay beneath the grease and grit. She wasn't sure what she was looking for, maybe a sign, maybe a story, but something told her this was just the beginning. The bell above the garage door jingled softly, cutting through the usual clatter of wrenches and engines. Carter looked up from under the hood of a rusty pickup, expecting the familiar face of a regular customer or a neighbor stopping by for a chat. Instead, his eyes locked onto her, the woman from the rain. She stood there, dry now, her coat neatly pressed and hair pulled back in a sleek ponytail. The storm hadn't touched her, but the memory of that soaked evening clung to the air between them like an unspoken secret. Her eyes scanned the cluttered space, the worn toolboxes and grease-streaked floors, as if trying to place herself in a world so far from the high-rise offices she must have come from. Carter wiped his hands on a rag, his heart pounding with a mix of surprise and something he couldn't quite name. "You're back?" he said simply, the words hanging in the heavy garage air. She offered a small, hesitant smile. "Yeah, I figured I should stop by before you disappeared again." He leaned against the workbench, still catching his breath. "What brings you here?" "Let's just say I'm curious." Her gaze didn't waver. "About you, about this place." The usual hum of the garage seemed to fade, replaced by a quiet tension neither wanted to break. Carter rubbed the back of his neck. "This isn't exactly a tourist spot." She laughed softly, the sound almost musical against the backdrop of clanking tools. "I'm not a tourist." There was a pause, then she said, "I didn't tell you who I really am before. Not yet." Carter's brow furrowed, but he didn't press. Instead, he gestured toward an empty chair. "Well, sit down. Maybe start from there." As she settled in, Carter realized that this day, the day she walked into his garage, was the first step toward something neither of them had expected, something that would change everything. Vivian settled into the creaky chair near the workbench, folding her hands in her lap as she watched Carter return to his tools. The hum of the garage filled the space, the rhythmic clinks, the distant roar of engines, the occasional hiss of compressed air. It was honest noise, the soundtrack of a life built on sweat and skill. When Carter glanced her way, she met his gaze with steady eyes, but offered no hint of her true identity. No mention of the sprawling empire she commanded, No whispers of the boardrooms where her word shaped millions. Here, she was just Vivian, the woman with the broken car who needed a tune-up. "I think the engine's been running rough," she said quietly, voice careful, as if testing the waters. "Could you take a look? Just a simple checkup." Carter nodded, rolling up his sleeves again. "Sure, let's see what's going on." As he popped the hood and started the inspection, Vivian's gaze wandered around the cluttered space. The worn posters of classic cars, the grease-stained manuals stacked haphazardly, the faded calendar marked with reminders and birthdays. It was a world so far removed from her own polished office, yet it felt oddly grounding. She asked questions not about business, not about money, but about him. How long had he been running the garage? Did he have family nearby? Did he like working with cars, or was it just a job? Carter answered simply, no frills. He spoke of Lily, his daughter, and the dreams he held onto for her. He shared stories of late nights, early mornings, and the quiet satisfaction of fixing something that mattered. Vivian listened, absorbing every word. She wasn't just gathering information about the garage or the man. She was trying to understand the life that grounded him, the kind of strength that wasn't measured in balance sheets but in grit and love. For now, the truth about who she was could wait. This was the first move, and she planned to play it carefully. The sun streamed through the dusty windows of the garage as the afternoon wore on, casting warm patches of light across the oil-streaked floor. Vivian was still there, sitting quietly on a worn stool, watching Carter tighten bolts on an old engine. The atmosphere was easy, even comfortable, until the small voice of a little girl cut through the hum. "Dad?" Lily's voice was bright and curious as she stepped into the garage, her backpack still slung over one shoulder. Her eyes immediately found Vivian, and without hesitation, she asked the question that neither adult was ready for. "Are you my dad's girlfriend?" For a heartbeat, time froze. Carter paused, wrench in hand, and looked toward Vivian, who had gone still, her smile faltering. Neither said a word. Lily, oblivious to the weight her question carried, stepped closer, eyes wide with innocent expectation. "You don't have to be shy," she said, her small fingers gripping the strap of her bag. "I just want to know if you're going to stay." Carter swallowed hard, feeling the sudden tightness in his chest. He wasn't sure if it was fear or hope or maybe both. Vivian's gaze softened, a flicker of warmth breaking through the uncertainty. "I'm not going anywhere," she said gently, kneeling down to meet Lily's eyes. "I promise." Lily beamed as if that was all the answer she needed. Carter finally set down his tools and moved to tuck a stray curl behind Lily's ear. "How about we all grab some dinner?" he suggested. Voice steady, but touched with something new, possibility. Vivian nodded, still catching her breath from the unexpected moment. The question had opened a door neither of them had dared knock on before, a door leading toward something neither wanted to rush, but both quietly hoped for. And just like that, the little girl with big questions became the heartbeat of what was about to unfold. Vivian stood at the edge of the garage doorway, glancing between Carter and Lily as the afternoon light softened into early evening. "I was thinking," she began, a touch uncertain but determined. "How about dinner, as thanks for everything today?" Carter blinked, caught off guard. It wasn't every day a stranger invited him and his daughter out to eat, especially one who had just rolled up in a sleek car and traded city ways for grease and grit. His eyes flicked to Lily, who looked up at him with hopeful anticipation. "Sure," he said finally, voice rough but sincere. "We'd like that." Vivian smiled, relief washing over her features. "Great. Nothing fancy, just a small diner nearby. It's honest food for honest people." The diner was exactly that, a modest place with vinyl booths and checkered floors, the kind where everyone knew your name and the specials were handwritten on a chalkboard. They settled into a corner booth, the smell of frying bacon and fresh coffee wrapping around them like a warm blanket. Lily's eyes sparkled as she studied the menu, but Carter kept his gaze on Vivian. trying to read between the lines of her polite smile and casual conversation. The meal came slow but steady, eggs cooked just right, toast with butter melting into every crumb, and thick slices of bacon that crackled with flavor. It was humble food, simple and unpretentious, but it carried a weight of comfort neither expected. Between bites, they traded stories. Lily proudly recounting her school day, Vivian sharing snippets of a childhood far from the spotlight, Carter speaking softly of his dreams for his daughter. No grand gestures, no forced laughter, just three people sharing a meal, their walls slowly lowering with each honest word. As the waitress cleared their plates, Vivian caught Carter's eye and said quietly, "Thank you for trusting me." He nodded, something unspoken passing between them. It wasn't a date. It was something quieter, something real, a small moment of connection in a world too often rushed and hollow. And for that night, it was enough. The soft glow of city lights spilled through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Vivian's hotel suite, casting long shadows across the sleek marble floors and minimalist furniture. The room was a world away from the grease-stained floors and hum of engines she'd left behind just hours ago. Here, everything was polished, controlled, an echo of the empire she commanded. Vivian stood by the window, fingers lightly tracing the glass as she stared out at the skyline. The quiet hum of her phone on the nightstand suddenly broke the stillness. She glanced at the screen. Boardroom, confidential. Her breath hitched. She didn't want to answer, not yet, not after today. But the phone kept ringing. Finally she picked up, voice steady but tinged with fatigue. "Vivian Hartley." The voice on the other end was sharp, impatient. "The quarterly meeting was moved up. The board expects your presence. Your decisions can't wait." Vivian closed her eyes, the weight of her responsibilities pressing down like a physical force. The empire she built demanded everything, her time, her energy, her very self. And yet something about today's rain-soaked encounter gnawed at her. "I understand," she replied carefully. "I'll be there." The call ended, leaving the suite eerily silent once more. She sank onto the edge of the velvet couch, hands trembling slightly. For the first time in years, she felt a pull towards something uncharted, a life beyond balance sheets and boardrooms, but the empire wouldn't wait. Not yet. Vivian's fingers brushed the raindrop-shaped pendant hanging around her neck, a small reminder of the woman she had been before power became her world. Outside, the city pulsed with relentless energy, but inside Vivian was caught between two lives, the one she ruled and the one she was beginning to crave. The phone buzzed again. She let it ring. Vivian stood just outside the garage, the afternoon sun filtering through the dusty air as she watched Carter move with quiet purpose. A battered sedan had sputtered to a halt on the side of the road nearby, its driver struggling with a hood and a pair of jumper cables. Without hesitation, Carter approached, sleeves rolled up, hands already reaching for the cables, as if born to solve this exact problem. She watched as he crouched beside the car, his voice calm and steady, explaining what he was doing as much to himself as to the grateful driver. There was no impatience in his tone, no hint of superiority, just a genuine willingness to help, plain and simple. The stranger's relief was palpable, and when the engine roared back to life, Carter simply smiled and waved the man on, refusing any offer of payment or thanks beyond a heartfelt nod. He didn't glance in Vivian's direction once, completely absorbed in the task and unaware that she was observing from the shadows. For Vivian, it was a revelation. In a world where favors often came with strings attached and kindness was a currency traded cautiously, here was a man who fixed more than cars. He fixed moments of desperation, quietly and without expectation. Her chest tightened as she realized how rare that was. Here was someone whose worth wasn't measured by the deals he closed or the numbers he managed, but by the simple acts of decency he offered strangers every day. The rain-soaked moment from days before returned to her, the way Carter had refused her money, The tired smile he wore like armor. It all made sense now. This man didn't just fix things. He restored faith. Vivian stepped forward, the faintest smile touching her lips. This was the kind of person she needed to know. Vivian sat cross-legged on the faded couch in Carter's modest living room, the soft hum of the old heater filling the quiet space. Lily was curled up beside her, clutching a worn stuffed rabbit, eyes wide and curious as she traced the delicate lines of Vivian's face with a tentative finger. The afternoon sun filtered through the lace curtains, casting gentle patterns that seemed to soften the edges of the world outside. For a long moment, Vivian said nothing, gathering the courage to speak in a voice that felt unfamiliar, less the CEO in command and more a woman trying to find her way. "Lily," she began softly, "sometimes even grown-ups get lost." The little girl tilted her head, eyes searching. "Lost? Like when you forget where you put your shoes?" Vivian smiled, a wistful curve. "Kind of like that. But sometimes it's not shoes. It's feelings or what you want or who you are. It can be confusing, even scary." Lily's grip tightened on the rabbit. "Do you get scared?" "Sometimes," Vivian admitted. "But that's okay, because it means you're trying. And trying is how we find our way back." The child nodded thoughtfully, her innocence offering a quiet kind of wisdom. "My dad says when he's scared, he thinks about me. It helps him." Vivian's eyes flickered to the door where Carter was quietly fixing dinner, oblivious to their little conversation. She felt a sudden swell of something she hadn't expected. Hope. "You're lucky," she whispered, "to have someone like that." Lily smiled, squeezing Vivian's hand. "We all need someone." For the first time in a long while, Vivian felt the heavy armor of her secrets loosen. In the warmth of this small home, with this little girl who saw her not as a CEO, but simply as Vivian, she found a fragile kind of peace. Sometimes even the strongest needed a place to be lost, and found again. Vivian wandered through the quiet streets of the small town like a shadow slipping through the morning fog. No flashing cameras, no polished shoes clicking behind her, no whispered conversations trailing her name. For the first time in years, she was invisible, and it felt like freedom. She passed the bakery where the scent of fresh bread curled warmly into the cool air, the bell above the door jingling, as locals greeted one another with familiar smiles. She lingered just long enough to watch a group of children chase a stray dog down the cracked sidewalk, their laughter light and unburdened. No one turned to look at her twice. Down the lane, the hardware store stood weathered but proud, its windows streaked with dust and stories. Vivian slipped inside, browsing the aisles with casual interest, admiring the rows of tools and garden gloves. The shopkeeper nodded without fanfare, exchanging no more than a passing glance. A small kindness in a place where faces were known and stories shared. She liked this quiet anonymity, the ability to be just another person walking past a cracked bench, not a headline or a CEO. It was a balm she hadn't realized she needed. At the town square, Vivian stopped to watch a couple sitting on a worn park bench, their hands intertwined in the kind of simplicity that felt foreign but deeply comforting. She breathed in the crisp air, feeling the pulse of a community rooted in honesty and care. Her phone buzzed silently in her pocket, a reminder of a world waiting beyond these streets. But for now, she let it lie. Vivian smiled to herself, the weight of her secrets feeling lighter here, where no one knew her name, and that was exactly how she wanted it. The night air was thick with the scent of damp earth and distant rain as Carter paced the cramped waiting room of the town clinic. His fingers drummed nervously on the vinyl chair armrest, every tick of the clock stretching longer than the last. Lily lay on the examination table, cheeks flushed bright red, eyes glassy with fever. She was shivering despite the thin blanket draped over her small frame. Carter's mind raced through worst-case scenarios, every shadow of doubt gnawing at him like a silent storm. Just as exhaustion began to settle in, the clinic door creaked open quietly. Vivian stepped inside, arms laden with a small bag of supplies, a bottle of medicine, a folded wool blanket, and a paper bag filled with homemade soup. Her coat was damp, hair pulled back tightly, but her eyes held steady warmth. Without a word, she approached Carter and set the items down gently. "I thought these might help," she said softly. He looked up, startled, but too tired to question how she knew where to find them. Instead, he gave a tired nod of thanks, his guard lowered by the quiet sincerity in her voice. Vivian crouched beside Lily, brushing damp hair from the girl's forehead and whispering soothing words. The tension in the room eased, replaced by a fragile calm that only small acts of kindness could bring. Carter watched, a knot in his chest loosening. He still didn't know much about Vivian, but tonight he didn't need to. In this moment, she was simply someone who cared. As the nurse returned with a thermometer and gentle smiles, Carter realized that sometimes help came when you least expected it, and from places you never thought to look. The sun was just beginning to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows over the gravel road as Carter turned the key in the ignition one last time. The engine sputtered, a desperate cough that faded into silence. The old truck, faithful for years but showing its age, had finally given up. Carter sighed, slumping back in the seat, frustration mixing with exhaustion. How was he supposed to get Lily to her dance recital now? Before he could even reach for his phone, the familiar hum of tires on gravel signaled Vivian's arrival. She pulled up smoothly in her sleek black sedan, windows fogged from the cool evening air. "Need a lift?" she called out, already stepping out into the fading light. Carter hesitated but nodded, grateful despite the awkwardness. Lily climbed into the back seat, eyes wide with excitement about the recital, momentarily forgetting the truck's betrayal. Vivian smiled warmly as they settled in, the quiet hum of the car a stark contrast to Carter's broken-down beast. For a moment, the tension melted into shared stories and soft laughter. But fate had other plans. As they pulled onto the highway, the engine began to sputter, then cough, a mirror of Carter's truck moments before. The car slowed, then coasted to a reluctant stop on the shoulder. Vivian's confident smile flickered, replaced by a sheepish grin. "Looks like my car wanted to feel included." Carter laughed, shaking his head. "Guess we're even now." They climbed out into the cool night air, the city lights twinkling distantly as they popped the hood. Together, under the glow of the sedan's headlights, they leaned over the engine, two strangers connected by broken machines and unexpected moments. Sometimes life's detours weren't about the destination, but the company you kept along the way. The sky, once clearing, had darkened again, heavy clouds gathering as if the storm wasn't quite finished. Rain began to fall softly at first, then heavier, drumming steadily against the pavement as Carter and Vivian stood beside the broken-down car, the glow from nearby streetlights flickering through the sheets of water. Neither spoke as they closed the hood, exchanging a glance that said, without words, they were in this together, whatever this was. Without waiting for an offer or invitation, they started walking down the quiet street, the rhythm of their steps matching the steady patter of rain around them. Their coats quickly soaked through, hair plastered to their faces and necks, shoes squelched in puddles, and the cold seeped in, but neither cared. The world had narrowed to the sound of rain on their shoulders and the simple act of moving forward side by side. Vivian lifted her face to the sky, letting the water wash over her, eyes closed. A small laugh escaped her lips, unguarded and genuine, breaking the stillness. Carter glanced over, surprised, then smiled, a rare, easy smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes. "You like the rain?" he asked, voice low. "Sometimes," she said, her voice soft but sure, "when it's not trying to drown you." He laughed quietly, nodding. "Yeah, I get that." They walked the rest of the way in silence, the world around them blurred and shining, everything familiar yet somehow new. The rain didn't sting or chill. It felt like a cleansing, a baptism of sorts. By the time they reached Carter's small house, dripping and shivering, the storm had slowed to a gentle drizzle. They stepped inside, shedding sodden coats and dripping shoes, the warmth of the kitchen greeting them like a promise. For once, soaked to the bone wasn't a burden, it was a beginning. The morning sun spilled softly through the kitchen window, casting a golden glow over the cluttered counters and worn wooden table. The aroma of coffee mingled with the sweet scent of syrup and sizzling butter, a promise of something warm and comforting after the cold, rain-soaked night before. Carter looked up from the stove, brow furrowed in mild surprise, as Vivian entered the small kitchen, arms full of groceries and a handwritten recipe card. She smiled, a little shy but determined, setting the bags down carefully. "I thought I'd try to make breakfast," she said, glancing toward Lily, who was already perched on a chair, eyes sparkling with curiosity. Carter exchanged a look with Lily, who grinned. "She makes better pancakes than you, Dad," the little girl declared confidently, bouncing in her seat. Vivian laughed softly, flipping a perfectly golden pancake with practiced ease. "Well, I've had a bit of practice." The three of them settled into a cozy rhythm, Vivian mixing batter, Carter pouring coffee, and Lily eagerly tasting the results with delighted squeals after each bite. The kitchen, usually filled with the hum of daily chores, was alive with laughter and stories. Between bites, Vivian shared a little about her favorite family recipes, and Carter talked about the ones Lily loved most. For a moment, the walls between their worlds seemed to crumble, replaced by the simple joy of a shared meal. Lily looked up at Vivian with wide eyes. "Can you come back tomorrow?" Vivian smiled, heart lighter than it had been in years. "I think I just might." And in that humble kitchen, surrounded by syrup and smiles, something unexpected began to take root, one pancake at a time. The evening light softened through the curtains, casting a warm amber glow over the small kitchen table, where Carter, Vivian, and Lily sat surrounded by plates half empty and glasses clinking softly. The day had slipped into quiet moments, the kind that settle between words and laughter, where the weight of unspoken thoughts hangs heavy in the air. Vivian stirred her tea slowly, eyes fixed on the swirling liquid as if searching for answers in the depths. Finally she spoke, voice low and hesitant, cutting through the comfortable silence. "Do you ever wonder if one moment, just one, can change everything?" Carter looked up, his gaze steady but unreadable. He said nothing. Lily, oblivious to the tension, jabbed her fork playfully at her plate, humming a tune from school. The room held its breath, waiting. Vivian's question lingered, folding into the quiet like a fragile secret, shared only between them. She searched Carter's face for a sign, anything that might reveal how he wrestled with that thought. He shifted, swallowing hard, eyes drifting to the worn wood grain of the table. The silence stretched, filled with possibility and fear, hope, and hesitation. Finally he spoke, voice rough but certain. "Maybe. But sometimes it's the moments you don't expect that end up meaning the most." Vivian nodded, a small smile breaking through the weight of the night. No more questions. No need for answers yet. Sometimes the biggest truths come wrapped in the smallest, quietest moments, waiting patiently for the right time to unfold. One afternoon, as Carter wiped grease from his hands in the dim light of the garage, Vivian stepped in, carrying a folder that seemed out of place among the worn tools and oil stains. She approached him with a calm confidence that unsettled him just enough to make him pause. "I want to offer you a job," she said, voice steady but gentle. Carter blinked, wiping his forehead with the back of his hand. "A job here?" "Yes, but it's consulting work. I think your skills and perspective could make a real difference." She handed him the folder, its crisp pages filled with proposals, plans, and possibilities. He flipped through the papers, the numbers and ideas, foreign yet intriguing. Why me? And why now? Vivian hesitated, choosing her words carefully. Because you understand things most people in my world don't. You see what matters beyond profits and headlines. Carter looked up, suspicion clouding his eyes. Look, I don't want charity. It's not charity, Vivian said firmly, meeting his gaze. It's respect. He studied her for a moment, searching for hidden motives, for strings attached. Finding none, he closed the folder slowly. I'll think about it. Vivian smiled, relief and hope mingling in her expression. That's all I ask. As she left the garage, Carter felt a strange mix of uncertainty and possibility. This wasn't just a job offer. It was a doorway to something new, something he never expected, but suddenly couldn't ignore. The small-town newspaper landed on Carter's doorstep like any other morning, its familiar rustle mingling with the crisp autumn air. He grabbed the folded pages without much thought, expecting the usual community news and weather updates. But when he opened it, his eyes caught something that made him freeze. There, front and center on the cover, was a glossy photo of Vivian Hartley, the woman who had slowly become a part of their lives. Her confident smile and poised gaze belonged to a world far removed from the grease-stained garage and humble kitchen they shared. The headline read, Hartley Auto CEO steps into new role, visionary leader and philanthropist. Carter's heart pounded as he scanned the article, the words painting a picture of a powerful woman, a titan of industry with influence that stretched far beyond their quiet town. Suddenly, the casual invitations and quiet dinners took on new meaning. Lily, perched on the steps beside him, peeked over his shoulder. "Who's that?" she asked, pointing at the picture. Carter swallowed hard, folding the paper carefully. "Someone very important," he said softly, though the weight of the truth pressed heavily between them. Her eyes searched his face, a mixture of curiosity and concern. "Is she different from what I thought?" He hesitated, then shook his head. "No, she's just more than we knew." For the first time, the invisible walls between their worlds felt real and solid, but so did the fragile threads they'd begun to weave together. Carter looked out toward the horizon, realizing that the story they were living wasn't just theirs anymore. It was part of something much bigger. And the night that truth settled in, everything changed. The afternoon sun filtered weakly through the grimy windows of the garage as Vivian stepped inside, the familiar scent of oil and metal wrapping around her like an old stubborn friend. She spotted Carter leaning against the workbench, arms crossed, eyes fixed on a half-disassembled engine. His usual warmth was gone, replaced by a cool distance that set her chest tight. She approached cautiously, voice soft but steady. "Hey?" Carter didn't look up. "Hey." A heavy silence settled between them, thick enough to drown in. Finally he spoke, voice low and edged with hurt. "Why didn't you just tell me?" Vivian swallowed hard, the truth caught in her throat. "I was trying to protect you." "Protect me?" Carter echoed, turning slowly to meet her gaze. "From what? The truth?" She bit her lip, unable to meet his eyes. "From everything that comes with it, the attention, the pressure. I didn't want to drag you into that." He shook his head, disappointment etched deep. "I'm not some charity case you have to shield. I deserved honesty." Her heart clenched. "I know. I'm sorry." For a long moment neither spoke. Then Carter sighed, stepping closer but keeping his distance. "I don't know what comes next, but I do know I can't build something real on half-truths." Vivian nodded, tears threatening, but held at bay. "I want to try, if you'll let me." The silence softened, replaced by fragile hope, the kind that begins when words are hardest to say but most necessary to hear. Vivian stood before Carter in the dim light of the garage, the weight of the unspoken hanging heavy between them. Her voice was steady but laced with regret as she began to explain the pressures she faced, the reasons for her silence, the walls she'd built to protect both of them. "I wanted to be honest," she said, "but I feared what the truth might do to us." Carter's eyes didn't soften. Instead, they narrowed, shadowed by disappointment that cut deeper than any argument. "It's not about fear," he said quietly, voice low but firm. "It's about trust." She searched his face for a flicker of understanding, but found only guarded resolve. "I thought I was doing the right thing." "Maybe to you," he replied, stepping back, "but to me, it felt like betrayal." Her chest tightened, a raw ache she hadn't expected. "I'm sorry." His gaze hardened. "I don't need billionaires," he said, words slow and deliberate. "I need honesty." The room seemed to shrink around them, the silence thickening like smoke. Vivian felt the distance grow, a chasm carved not by wealth or status, but by the simple, essential thing she'd failed to give: truth. For all her power, she was humbled by the one thing she couldn't buy. And in that moment, she understood that forgiveness wasn't something she could demand. It had to be earned, one honest step at a time. The afternoon light filtered softly through the kitchen window as Vivian sat quietly at the worn wooden table, staring down at the crumpled note resting in her hands. The small piece of paper was scribbled in uneven, looping handwriting, words that held the kind of simple wisdom only a child could offer. "It's okay. We all mess up. But I still think you're good." Vivian's breath caught, the weight of those words settling over her like a balm. She hadn't expected forgiveness, especially not from someone so young, so pure in her heart. A tear slipped down her cheek, tracing a path she didn't bother to wipe away. She looked up as Lily appeared in the doorway, cheeks flushed and eyes bright with hopeful innocence. "Did you get my note?" the little girl asked, voice soft but steady. Vivian smiled through the tears, voice trembling just a little. "Yes, I did. It means more than you know." Lily stepped forward, wrapping her arms around Vivian in a gentle hug. "You don't have to be perfect to be good. Daddy says that too." For the first time in weeks, Vivian felt a flicker of lightness in her chest, a fragile but real hope blossoming from the simplest act of kindness. Sometimes it was the smallest voices that carried the loudest truths. And in that quiet moment, surrounded by warmth and forgiveness, Vivian began to believe that maybe, just maybe, she could find her way back. The garage was alive with the familiar scent of oil and rubber. As Carter worked under the hood of an old sedan, the afternoon sun casting long shadows through the open doors. Grease smeared across his hands and forehead, he wiped a trickle of sweat away, frustration tightening his jaw. The engine was stubborn, refusing to cooperate, and the clock was ticking. The creak of the garage door caught his attention. He looked up to see Vivian stepping inside, not in heels or a tailored suit, but in work boots, and a faded flannel shirt rolled at the sleeves. Her hair was pulled back loosely, strands escaping in a way that made her look less like a CEO and more like someone willing to get her hands dirty. Without a word, she set down a toolbox beside him and reached for a wrench. Carter blinked, surprised but welcoming the unexpected company. They worked side by side, passing tools and sharing quick glances that spoke of newfound respect and tentative trust. The air filled with the sounds of clanking metal, whispered curses at stubborn bolts, and the occasional burst of laughter when a tool slipped or a finger got pinched. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't polished. It was messy and real. A collaboration born not from necessity, but from a desire to bridge two worlds. As the engine finally roared to life, Vivian leaned back, wiping grease from her cheek with a grin. "We make a pretty good team." Carter nodded, feeling a warmth beyond the heat of the engine. "Yeah, we do." In that cluttered, oil-streaked garage, amidst the tools and sweat, something deeper was being fixed, something that no wrench or rag could touch, and this time it was meant to last. Whispers started to weave through the town like wildfire. At the diner, in the grocery store aisles, and under the wide oak trees in the park, people talked about the woman who'd arrived from nowhere and wasn't leaving. Vivian Hartley, the CEO, with the polished smile and the unexpected kindness, had become the subject of both curiosity and suspicion. Old Mr. Jenkins muttered to anyone who'd listen, "What's she really doing here? This isn't the city." The younger crowd exchanged sideways glances, unsure if they could trust someone from a world so far removed from their own. A few closed doors, cautious eyes, and guarded greetings greeted Vivian wherever she went. But Vivian didn't waver. She showed up early at the community center, lending a hand to repaint the faded walls. She listened intently to farmers' stories, asked questions without judgment, and offered help without expectation. When the library needed new books, she quietly donated funds. Not flashy, just enough to make a difference. When a storm tore through the edge of town, Vivian was there helping neighbors clear debris before anyone asked. Slowly, the walls that guarded the town's heart began to crack. People saw her not as an outsider, but as a neighbor, flawed, earnest, and willing to stand beside them through thick and thin. At the Saturday market, Mrs. Callahan handed Vivian a basket of fresh tomatoes with a nod of acceptance. The kids waved without hesitation when she walked past. Even Mr. Jenkins stopped grumbling long enough to offer a reluctant smile. Vivian's presence was no longer a question mark, but a quiet certainty. And as the town opened its arms, she found a home she hadn't known she'd been searching for. The late afternoon sun cast long golden shadows across the living room as the three of them settled into the worn couch, a quiet warmth filling the space. Lily was nestled between Carter and Vivian, her small hand slipping naturally into Vivian's as she leaned against her side. The easy comfort of the moment was something none of them had dared to expect. As the conversation drifted lazily from school projects to silly stories, Lily's voice broke the calm with an innocent question. "Mom, can you help me with my homework?" Vivian froze, the word hanging in the air like a fragile glass ornament, caught in mid-fall. Carter's smile faltered, eyes widening slightly, his hand tightening around Lily's. Neither spoke. Neither corrected. Lily's gaze flicked between them, satisfied with the silence, and she continued, "I'm stuck on this math problem." Vivian smiled gently, brushing a stray curl from Lily's forehead. "Of course, sweetie. Let's figure it out together." Carter exhaled quietly, the tension easing as he realized the moment had passed without fracture. What Lily had said wasn't just a slip of the tongue, it was a turning point. In that soft, unguarded exchange, the three of them found a new kind of family, one built not on titles or expectations, but on trust, presence, and the simple act of belonging. And as the evening light faded into night, Vivian understood that sometimes the most meaningful bonds were the ones we didn't plan for, but welcomed anyway. Early one crisp morning, before the sun had fully stretched its golden fingers across the town, a small crowd gathered outside the garage. Word had spread. Something was happening. Something different. The air buzzed with quiet excitement, neighbors drawn by curiosity, and a shared sense of hope. Carter stood beside Vivian, both of them watching, as a freshly painted wooden sign was hoisted above the garage door. The letters, bold and proud, spelled out a new name, Turner and Hartley Auto. Below it, in smaller script, read the motto they had chosen together, "Built on grit, fueled by grace." The sign wasn't just wood and paint, it was a symbol, a testament to the hard work, the second chances, and the unlikely partnership that had grown from a chance meeting in the rain. It was proof that even in a town shaped by struggle, something new could take root, stronger and more beautiful than anyone expected. Neighbors clapped softly, smiles spreading like sunrise. Old Mr. Jenkins nodded approvingly, wiping his hands on his pants as he said, "That's a sign of real change." Vivian felt a warmth in her chest, a quiet pride that came not from titles or power, but from belonging. Carter's hand found hers, fingers intertwining with a promise unspoken but deeply understood. The garage had always been a place of fixing engines and broken parts. Now it was a place where lives were repaired too. And as the morning light bathed the sign in hope, everyone knew this was only the beginning. The evening air was cool and still, carrying the faint scent of pine and distant rain. Carter and Vivian sat side by side on the porch steps of the little house that had slowly become their sanctuary. The world beyond seemed to hush itself, leaving just the two of them wrapped in a quiet kind of peace. Carter reached beside him and picked up a simple ceramic mug, worn at the edges but sturdy and familiar. The words were painted in faded blue letters. "Home is wherever I'm with you." He turned the mug toward Vivian, eyes steady and full of something deeper than words. Vivian's breath caught, a tear slipping down her cheek before she could stop it. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came, only the weight of the moment, heavy and beautiful. He didn't kneel. He didn't pull out a ring or make grand promises. This was no spectacle, no dramatic gesture, just a mug, a truth, and a quiet declaration that said more than any speech ever could. Vivian reached out, her fingers brushing against his, trembling with emotion. "That's perfect," she whispered. Carter smiled softly, his own eyes glistening. "I don't need fancy words or shows, just you and this place. That's enough." She leaned into him, the tears flowing freely now, a mixture of relief, joy, and love. In that simple moment, surrounded by the soft glow of porch light and the gentle night, they found a promise that was real, lasting, and true. And sometimes, that's all anyone ever needs. The sun dipped low behind the rolling hills, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. On the porch swing of the little house, Carter, Vivian, and Lily sat side by side, the gentle creak of the swing blending with the whisper of the evening breeze. No music played, no crowds gathered, just the quiet comfort of three people who had chosen each other. Lily rested her head against Vivian's shoulder, fingers entwined with hers, while Carter's arm draped protectively around both of them. The weight of the day's worries seemed to lift, replaced by a peaceful kind of belonging that didn't need words or promises. They watched as the last rays of sunlight slipped away, leaving behind a sky full of stars, each one a small beacon of hope, a reminder that sometimes the simplest moments carry the deepest meaning. No wedding bells, no grand declarations, just a family formed not by ceremony, but by shared love, trust, and quiet resilience. And in that gentle twilight, they became exactly what they were meant to be, together. Years later, children wandered past the little house on the edge of town, their voices low and full of wonder. They called it the place where love lives. A story passed down like a secret treasure, tales of kindness, courage, and a family built on more than blood. They whispered about the girl who used to watch cartoons through the window, sitting quietly on the porch, dreaming of a life that seemed just out of reach. They didn't know her name, but they knew her heart, the way it opened slowly to the woman who came not as a stranger, but as something far greater, a mother. Neighbors smiled when they heard the stories, some shaking their heads in disbelief, others nodding with knowing eyes. The little house stood as a beacon, a reminder that families weren't always made by birth, but by moments of grace, by choices made in rain and quiet kitchens, by love that dared to stay. And so the legend grew, of a man who fixed more than cars, a woman who found her way home, and a girl who found a family in the most unexpected place. In that story, the town found hope, and in their hearts, so did everyone who heard it.